Two hackers find the exact same vulnerability. They submit identical technical descriptions to a bug bounty program. One receives a $50 low-severity payout. The other walks away with $10,000. Identifying an insecure direct object reference establishes that a flaw exists, but it does not quantify the organizational damage. The bug is merely the starting point for a professional engagement. Triage engineers review dozens of these reports daily. If you submit a bare-bones URL manipulation showing you can view another user's test account, they will route it straight to the informational or low pile. They do not have the time to imagine the worst-case scenario for you. The difference between that low-tier payout and a critical-tier reward comes down to post-exploitation. It is the execution of specific, demonstrable techniques that prove exactly how much damage the flaw can cause. Security triage teams pay exclusively for demonstrated business risk. They won't pay for theoretical code anomalies. This is the escalation matrix, a structured methodology to weaponize a basic vulnerability. At the base is your primitive, your initial foothold. From here, you systematically climb the tiers to force a higher severity score, extracting data, elevating privileges, seizing accounts, and executing financial fraud. Applying this matrix transforms a simple parameter manipulation into undeniable evidence of critical system compromise. This image illustrates our baseline scenario. It shows an intercepted HTTP GET request pointing to an API endpoint with the user identifier 1001. If you alter that identifier to 1002 and the server returns a lateral peer's private data, you have established your primitive. This moves us into Tier 1 of the matrix, data enumeration. Instead of stopping at one profile, you configure automated proxy tools to sequentially fuzz that vulnerable parameter across thousands of iterations. The output is a massive, growing table of extracted personal, identifiable information. Manually exploiting a single record is a localized privacy glitch. Extracting 10,000 records in 3 minutes constitutes a data breach. Automating the primitive forces the security team to upgrade the evaluated risk from a minor data leak to a systemic database compromise. Tier 2 shifts the focus from passive data reading to state-changing application actions. This is privilege escalation. Moving across peer accounts is horizontal escalation. True architectural compromise requires vertical escalation, breaching upwards into a secured higher-tier platform. Horizontal escalation occurs when you manipulate hidden request paths to interact with data owned by users at your exact same permission level. Vertical escalation means forcing the application infrastructure to grant you administrative capabilities that you were never authorized to possess. One specific tactic to trigger this is HTTP method swapping. By changing a GET request to a PUT request and appending a JSON payload with an admin true parameter, poorly configured backend systems will occasionally overwrite your user role entirely. Achieving state-changing capabilities forces triage to assess the vulnerability at a systemic architectural level, rather than dismissing it as a localized user-level error. Tier 3 applies the base primitive directly to the application's core authentication lifecycle to achieve account takeover. To reach this tier, you isolate specific application flows that handle identity, such as password resets or OAuth token generation. When a victim triggers a password reset, you intercept the resulting post request within your proxy before the backend processes it. If the endpoint lacks proper validation, you can replace the victim's email or user identifier with your own. The server generates a valid reset token for their account, but routes it directly to you. Capturing a valid authentication token allows you to instantly lock the original user out and establish persistent, unauthorized access to their profile. Proving an account takeover demonstrates a complete loss of user integrity. This elevates the finding to a critical severity immediately. Tier 4 applies the vulnerability primitive directly to business logic to manipulate organizational revenue. You pivot away from user identity and target endpoints associated with financial operations, payment gateways, shopping carts, or invoice portals. By injecting negative integer values or modifying numerical parameters in a checkout request, you test if the backend logic will bypass its own payment requirements. You alter transaction endpoints to force unauthorized changes to cart values, reduce shipping costs to 0, or duplicate refunded amounts. This is the most critical escalation. You manipulate the application to misroute funds or distribute premium assets without compensation, resulting in direct monetary loss for the organization. Proving financial fraud translates a technical vulnerability into clear financial liability. This ensures the highest possible bounty payout. The ultimate goal of post-exploitation is to execute exactly what the developer assumed an end user would never attempt. But executing the attack is only half the battle. You must translate that post-exploitation sequence into a highly structured bug bounty report. This image shows the contrast in documentation. On the left is a weak proof of concept containing a single HTTP request. On the right, a strong proof of concept that details the complete multi-step exploitation chain required to replicate the damage. The impact section of your report carries strict requirements. You cannot state what an attacker might do. Document exactly the data you extracted, the administrative privileges you held, and the business logic you broke. A precise, evidence-based impact statement forces triage teams to acknowledge the demonstrated risk over the theoretical code flaw. Data enumeration, privilege escalation, account takeover, and financial fraud. These 4 stages form your operational blueprint. Mastering this bypassing intended restrictions in order to take absolute control of the application's internal logic. A beginner stops testing when they find a broken parameter. A professional finds that same parameter and immediately works to weaponize it. Rigorous post-exploitation execution transforms a theoretical code flaw into a verified security breach.